Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. U.S. President Donald Trump created the multinational body he calls the Board of Peace in his own image. He is convening it and presiding over it. Trump's distaste for the United Nations is also well known. He wants the maximum freedom of maneuver possible, but can he get around the resistance of China and Russia? Can his board effectively replace the United Nations, and will it survive his presidency? And how will the different and sometimes conflicting interests of regional powers such as Israel, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia play in this context? To look into this topic, we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, who formerly served as the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, currently the President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's good to have you here, sir.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's great to have you with us, General.
Thanks.
And last but certainly not least, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Amir Oren, and immediately also congratulations for the episode number 1000. So that is a great accomplishment after so many years.
Not mine, yours.
Well, you joined a year later or a year and a half later, so it's been a while. But Mr. Oren, the Board of Peace, a replacement or temporary replacement, as some refer to it, to the United Nations in the context of the Gaza Strip after the UN effectively and quite seemingly failed to really provide an answer to the complexities related to this terror-ridden territory. What can you tell us about that as the foundation for today's discussion?
So President Trump, in the first year of his second term, brought about two innovations, the Department of War and the Board of Peace. Seemingly a contradiction here. He didn't like the term Department of Defense because he wanted it to be, or at least to sound, more warlike. But he is also aiming, of course, at the Nobel Peace Prize, and he wants, again, something which may sound contradictory. He wants to single-handedly dictate policy, but also be supported by others. And therefore, he created this three-tier mechanism he calls the Board of Peace, with himself as the Supremo. He is joined by members of the Executive Committee, under whom there are participating countries. There is also another staff. And in Gaza, there is supposed to be an international stabilization force. This week, we are seeing the first attempt to put some action into this mechanism in the Board of Peace being convened by President Trump regarding Gaza. Gaza is the first field test of this Board of Peace. If it succeeds, he may try to get it to other regions of the globe, and therefore, more than just the Gaza success is at stake here. He wants to show the world that he can supplant the United Nations.
Indeed. Well, General Kuperwasser, when speaking with an American colleague, it was made very clear to me the Board of Peace is not just about Gaza. It's a broader mechanism that seeks to bring about ambitious plans for the future. And yet, when I look at this new construct, Gaza is the foundation, as Mr. Oren alludes to the success of any type of mechanism, irrespective of its various ambitions. Where is this organization or institution, as it's been established as such, taking the international fora-like organizations into the capacity to actually implement?
Well, the test is in Gaza. And in order to succeed in this test, it's not only the Board of Peace. Under the Board of Peace, as Amir mentioned, there are many other structures that are supposed to make sure that this is going to be a success. And as a matter of fact, President Trump cannot afford the failure. If this is going to end up with a fiasco, this is going to harm incredibly the prestige of President Trump. He cannot afford that. And that's why he built not only the Board of Peace, which is more on the declarative level, and as a source of funding for the other bodies that are going to be functioning on the ground, but he formed also the executive committee of the Board of Peace, led by Ambassador Minister Mladenov, that is a very capable person and has been proven already as somebody who has the trust of all the bodies and the parties involved. And he's built the CMCC, the Civil Military Coordination Center in Kiryat Gat, where so many people from different nationalities work together in order to make sure that things are going the right way. And he has formed the ISF, which is for now some empty structure that has to be filled in the future once we can move forward. And he has formed the technocratic government of Gaza. All of these bodies are there in order to make sure that this is going to be a success. And there's one small obstacle on the way. Hamas refuses to disarm. And that's why President Trump repeatedly says, Hamas has to disarm. Hamas has promised me that they are going to disarm. This doesn't make much impression on Hamas. But we shall, as the President usually says, we shall have to wait and see. Let's wait and see. And in the end of the day, in my mind, the pressure is on Israel. We have the mission of proving the Board of Peace successful. And the way we have to do that is by making sure that Hamas is disarmed. And since I don't believe that anybody else is going to disarm Hamas, it's going to come back to us. Please disarm Hamas. And this is not going to be easy. It's a very difficult task, but it has to happen. And even if we manage to convince Hamas that we mean business and we are going to take the necessary steps in order to disarm them, this is not necessarily going to be good enough in order to make them disarm, adopt some method of disarming themselves.
With that being said, General Sofrin, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. The United States has repeatedly mentioned both Qatar and Turkey as guarantors for everything that has to do with the Islamist Hamas terror organization, highlighting their unique relationship with this terror group in order to bring about the desired outcomes. While the pressure is on Israel, as General Kuperwasser has mentioned, to bring about the desired outcome, isn't the focus on Qatar and Turkey equally as important, considering the fact that they become redundant in the context of President Trump's vision for the future of this region, unless they bring about the disarmament of Hamas?
I think that choosing Qatar and Turkey is Mr. Trump's choice. You didn't mention Egypt, which is a very important player.
True.
At least to what regards to Gaza.
Yep.
Okay? And he didn't choose Egypt. He didn't mention Egypt, not at all. And the Egyptian has a lot of interest in what happens in Gaza because they have mutual border. And everything that happens in Gaza affects directly what happens in Egypt. But coming back to your question, I think that they don't have the ability to rearm Hamas or to affect Hamas or to influence Hamas to willingly give up, wave the white flag and say we're going to be Zionists tomorrow morning. It won't happen. They may make some concessions with the pressure applied by Turkey and by Qatar to give up mainly rocket launchers or something of that kind, or anti-tank missiles or part of them, but not the personal weapon systems, not the rifles, not anything else, and they will maintain their capabilities. Now, that can be presented as an achievement of some kind, but the truth is that it won't change the realities radically. That means that Hamas will stay as an armed entity within Gaza Strip. No matter who is going to come, I don't see the Indonesian forces coming in and dismantling Hamas by force or forcing them to disarm. I don't see it is happening, or any other force that will be sent from some Muslim country will make that effort. And in the end, as General Kuperwasser said, it will remain the Israeli issue, and we will have to make sure that Hamas is dismantled, and this with only one meaning: to use military force to force Hamas and to fight for a very long time within Gaza Strip. We've been fighting there for more than 2 years. We didn't achieve the goal. It's going to take some more years if we're going to choose to apply now military force within Gaza. It will take some more years in order to get to some achievement and not total destroyal of Hamas.
Interesting. Well, Mr. Oren, last weekend we had the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who also serves, of course, as President Trump's national security advisor, highlight that the Board of Peace is not a replacement for the United Nations, that they still see the value in the United Nations, but it requires reform in order to bring about the necessary change. Something that, considering the fact that just recently the Islamic Republic, and we're talking about last week, has become a member of one of the institutions' boards in order to advance democratic values, it just shows the sheer redundancy of the root cause of this institution that initially was meant to diminish friction by establishing discourse between nations. Now, with regard to the Gaza Strip, we do see that the Board of Peace does have the ambitious aspirations as we established the foundation to this discussion, but within this context, the application of whatever they want to achieve is not there, and there is a hard time finding the right mechanism to ultimately convince nations that the dramatic changes required on the ground are necessary to bring about that aspired change. What can you tell us within that context?
Well, the last time around, 20 years ago, when an American president, George W. Bush, tried to bring some diplomatic progress, if not peace, to Israel and the Palestinians, he had 3 junior, but nevertheless partners. The quartet was, of course, an American-led mechanism, but it still had Russia, the UN, and the European Union. All of these are gone. Now it's a one-man show. It's Trump's show. The problem...
With that being said, the head of the quartet is still very much involved.
Yes, involved in what?
Tony Blair.
Well, of course, the Tony Blair, whose public persona was tarnished to some extent by another affair, which is not our focus, is working for Trump right now. He has worked with Jared Kushner and others on earlier drafts, but this is beside the point. Following up on what our distinguished panelist said, if Israel has to fight in Gaza, it must do it before the reconstruction starts. Of course, dismantling Hamas is supposed to be the condition, the precondition, but nobody is going to invest in Gaza if a week later bombs are falling on what was done. My own idea or prediction is that Hamas will not disarm, but the local police forces will be set up with Hamas personnel and weapons. They will be called public security battalions, whatever you want, and at least the outward appearance would be Hamas has dismantled. Now we have armed police guarding the streets, fighting crime. This is very important. Fighting corruption, what have you. All in order to give President Trump at least a reason to say he won before the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize committee convenes and before the midterm elections.
General Kuperwasser, I'm more skeptical about that.
So am I. I think, you see, the problem here is that the notion that Hamas was disarmed has much greater importance than just whether it's going to fit into President Trump's vision for Gaza.
Absolutely.
The issue here is whether the 7th of October is going to be remembered by the Palestinians as a success or a terrible failure.
Oh.
And if Hamas is going to admit that it was disarmed, then it's going to admit at the same time that the 7th of October was a failure.
Right.
That's why they cannot afford it. It's not that they care so much about not being disarmed just because they need the weapons. They can rearm themselves later. But admitting that they had to disarm, it means that they have failed. That's the main problem. That's why, by the way, the plan, the 20 points plan of President Trump starts with saying Gaza is going to be de-radicalized. It's not a matter of whether you have arms or not. It's a matter of what you have in your mind. What cognition do you have? This de-radicalization is a part of a cognition warfare. And of course, it's a long process, but saying that we are going to start a process that would eventually lead to the de-radicalization of Gaza, this is something that is a bigger contradiction with Hamas, with what Hamas stands for, than just the arms.
A cognitive warfare, and if we may linger on this for a moment because it's very important, to de-radicalize any type of territory from such a radical type of ideology over time is, at least historically, is unprecedented. Even the situation in Germany where it was so-called denazified in a certain aspect, it came after Germany was subject to how many rapings by the Soviets and the atrocities committed there. I think 4 million women were raped just in the first months that they started engaging in those atrocious activities there in Germany. That has so weakened the spirit of the German people that it completely altered their cognitive capacity. And that is something that we did not have in Gaza. The so-called genocide that is being promoted by the enemies of Israel within Western societies, it's quite clear that this is a state-run operation, considering the fact that when an actual genocide of people is happening in Iran, everybody is dead silent, meaning that the Iranians are probably involved in this in one way or another against Israel. Now, General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your take on this because the complexity here is one that requires deep thinking, but also very radical implementation that would bring about a type of shift that cannot be achieved immediately.
Of course not. It's something that will take many years. Because if you want to de-radicalize the Gaza Strip, you have to begin from education at the basic level. That means to change all the books, all the materials that are being touched or taught by the children, or taught by the children, to change all the teachers, to de-radicalize them, to appoint new teachers that will come with new ideology. I don't know where from. Maybe from Judea and Samaria, maybe. Even though we don't mention Judea and Samaria because this is Palestinian Authority, of course, and they won't allow to come into Gaza.
They teach the same textbooks that they teach in Gaza, so
the same
this is not going to help much.
I believe. So if you want to go to this direction and to this assignment, it will take at least a generation, if not more than that, to radicalize the Gaza Strip. And I believe that it's something that can be done, not immediately, of course, and I don't believe it will end up within a generation or two.
Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, General Kuperwasser, has mentioned a couple of times that Israel will not accept anything less than demilitarizing the Gaza Strip.
Full
Demilitarization. Just at the start of this week, we heard him speak to the Conference of Major American Presidents of major American organizations and companies, and there he mentioned that Gaza does not have tanks and heavy munitions. No, they have AK-47s, and that is what Israel demands: the removal of 60,000 AK-47s. Now.
More than 60,000.
More than 60,000. Much more than 60. He mentioned this number, but it's a lot more than that.
Of course.
Is that viable?
It's not, but this is not the matter. Of course, this is a declarative demand. We demand that Hamas is going to be disarmed from everything. Everything means what we call heavy weapons, rockets and such. The capability to produce new weapons, the workshops in which they produce the weapons, the tunnels, all the tunnels should be given up, and all the light arms. Because at the end of the day, in this attack of 7th of October, they didn't use only heavy weapons. They used the AK-47s and so on and so forth.
And RPG.
And RPGs and whatever. So we have to make sure that they are totally disarmed. But we know that we cannot reach a situation where we can account for any and each AK-47. So the acceptance of Hamas that they are disarmed is more important than the factual disarming of each and every Palestinian armed person in Gaza. That's the most important thing. The fact that it is not allowed, that they accept that it is not allowed to them to carry weapons, regardless if they do carry them or not, is more important than whether we reach the last AK-47. And that is something that is very difficult to achieve. And we have in front of us an enormous challenge. But we have to win this war. And at the same time, I always say that
Can you define
that's what I'm saying. Reaching the point where we were able to convince Hamas to release all of the hostages in exchange for very minimal concessions by Israel was very difficult and was made possible by our success in convincing Hamas that we are going to take over the Gaza City by Operation Chariots of Gideon 2. They believed us that we are going to do that. And that issue of demilitarization and disarming of the weapons, even that is not going to be enough, because this is an existential issue for Hamas. They would rather die, and we are facing an enormous challenge here, but we have to be ready to do that. And if you ask me what is victory here, is when Hamas admits that it is disarmed. When Hamas admits that it is disarmed, when everybody understands that you are not allowed to carry arms in Gaza if you're a Hamas person, you cannot actually be a Hamas person in Gaza, and you are not allowed to carry a weapon, although some of them will still have them. This is what we call the complete or full victory. And it's not tomorrow morning. It's going to take time, and Trump has to be patient, because unless he has some trick that we don't know of, that would convince Hamas to disarm without a military operation, then he has to wait for the military operation to bear fruit, and this is going to take time.
General Kuperwasser, the day that an Arab household will not have weapons, irrespective of where they are, whether in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, in Israel, or anywhere else, that's the day.
I'm talking about Hamas not having weapons.
No, I'm saying, generally speaking, what is Hamas if not the people themselves, the clans, the families? You cannot disassociate those.
By the way, some of the
people.
families are armed by Israel or with the consent of Israel. Those who are against Hamas.
Allegedly. Right. Well, General Sofrin, briefly, where's the disparity between the wishful thinking and aspirations of the Board of Peace to reality on the ground? Briefly, if you will. And to what degree can the one influence the other, because ultimately what the Board of Peace claims to push for is to establish some type of momentum on a regional scale and utilize that momentum to realize certain diktats on the ground?
I believe that the first effort will be to try to begin reconstructing Gaza, but Israel objects reconstructing Gaza unless Gaza is demilitarized. And therefore, there are differences between, gaps between the Israeli concept and the American concept, or the Americans who lead the Board of Peace. And therefore, I believe that we meet somewhere in the middle that will go in parallel. That means the beginning of reconstruction in Gaza, and in parallel, the effort to try to dismantle Hamas. I don't believe that the second one will go on the same tempo as the first one, and both of them will take a lot of time.
Mr. Oren.
At the risk of sounding naive, in order to have the power of the radicals diminish, you must bolster the moderates, even if they are relative moderates. And they are the Palestinian Authority. If you don't want to give them any power, you are not going to have Hamas or others relinquish any power. And we talked about the battle of minds and hearts, ideology. In Vietnam, the Americans lost. And a generation later, it turned out that they won the fight over minds and hearts. It doesn't mean that Israel has to lose in order to win this fight. But all hope is not lost.
And I think that I personally think that the classification of moderates, quote unquote, is not relevant to this story.
Yes, because the only difference between the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas is just the pace and the tools you use in order to get the same result. So it makes no sense to let the Palestinian Authority.
Right. Well,
I know it will sound naive.
This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Kuperwasser, General Sofrin, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. I'd like to thank you at home. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.